Yep.
You're playing?
I can't hear him.
I can't see, so I thought it was me.
Can you hear me now?
Can't hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right. Good evening. We're going to get started. We're learning Daf Tzadi Gimel, and we're starting 2/3 of the way down on Tzadi Beis Amud Beis. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yanai, that's 4 lines, 5 lines before the wide lines. Amar Rav Yanai, B'chabura nimnu v'gamru. They got together as Rabbanim and they paskin. Ein kedushin tofsin b'yavama. If a woman is a shomeres yavam and somebody tries to get engaged to her, the mechanism of kedushin does not work. No get is required. She's not married, and this is a continuation of yesterday's sugya. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi lo mishnah seinu hizu. Rabbi Yochanan says back to Rabbi Yanai, isn't this a mishnah? What does the mishnah say? It's not. Ha'omer leisha hared mekudeshes li. If a man says to a woman, "You'll be married to me on a particular condition," and the Gemara then drops what would be one of many possible conditions, either la'achar she'eskayer, after the man says, "I will convert," or la'achar she'tiskayri, after you will convert, the man says to the woman, or the man says la'achar she'eshtachrer, after I'm freed, or la'achar she'tishtachreri, after you get freed, or la'achar she'yamus ba'alech, after your husband dies, or la'achar she'tamus achosech, after your sister dies, or la'achar she'achlotz lach yivmeich, or after a chalitza is done from your yavam. So then the halacha is Eina Mekudeshes. And what line did we start with today? Rav Yanai had said the kedushin is not tosin. So maybe, says Rav Yochanan, that Rav Yanai, your din is actually Mefur Shemishna. Amar Le, Rav Yanai says back to him, yes, that's true, but you just have to know where your roots come from. Ilav de Deloy Lach Chaspa, if not for the fact that I picked up a piece of pottery, Mimishkachas Marganisa to say, would you have found a pearl underneath it? Obviously a homily of sorts. And what the Gemara is basically saying is, I'm the one that revealed this shita to you, that Kedushin is not Tofes, and only afterwards did you find the Mishnah that seems to match. Amalei Rish Lakish chimes in and says, Ilav de Kalsech Gavra Rabba, if not for the fact that you were praised like a great rabbi, speaking to Rabbi Yochanan, Havamina, I might have thought, I might have thought Masnisin Rabbi Akiva. I might have thought that this Mishnah, following the Shita of Rabbi Yanai, is the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. De Amar Ein Kedushin Tosin B'Chayve Lavin, because Rabbi Akiva, similar to our statement of Rabbi Yanai, that Ein Kedushin is Tosin B'Yavama, so Rabbi Akiva also has a similar line that Ein Kedushin Tosin B'Chayve Lavin. The mechanics of Kedushin don't work in regards to Chayve Lavin. Says the Gemara that can't be. That's not Rabbi Akiva. If Rabbi Akiva had it been Rabbi Akiva, then Ki Amar La La'achar She'achlotz Lichtiv Mich, in the case of the Mishnah that we just saw, that Rabbi Yochanan brought, where we saw that maybe he says to her, "You'll marry me after your yavam will do chalitza to you." According to Rabbi Akiva, that marriage would have worked because lispasei be kedushin, there should have been a tfisa of kedushin. The marriage should be chal. Why? Because the Hashem Inam the Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Adam Nakna Davar Shalom Bala Olam. Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion. We'll see soon that it's not so simple that this is Rabbi Akiva's opinion, but it seems Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that Davar Shalom Bala Olam is a reality. A person can make a kinyan with something that isn't yet brought into the world. So what does that mean here? Well, this whole Mishnah, with all of its different iterations, was indicating that if a person makes a conditional kedushin with a woman, then in theory it should work, even if the condition is not yet something that has entered the world. So this principle is called davar shelo bala olam. And if something doesn't yet exist in the world, can we make a kinyan on a future possibility? And Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that yes, you can. Ditnan. How do we know that Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that we can make a kinyan on something that doesn't yet exist in the world? So the Gemara says on the top of Tzadid Gimel Amud Aleph, if there's a woman who says, Konim shani osa leficha, a woman says, I'm making a promise that you're not allowed to benefit from anything that I make. So the halacha is, Ein tzarich lahafer. The husband doesn't have to do hafar at all because her konam, her commitment is a zero. Take a look at Rashi on the top of the page. Dibra maschel konim shani osa leficha. Isha she'amar lebaila mashni oseh melacha yehi aser leficha bekonam. She says, anything that I do, any of my handiwork is forbidden from you. The halacha is, as Rashi continues, Eino tzarech lahafer, and Rashi explains, Tekevan dekama shabda leila ma'isiyadeha, because as it relates to Jewish law, that this woman's her ma'isiyadeha, her income, anyways belongs to her husband. Therefore, lo matzia nedara, her neder has no teeth, it has no standing at all, and therefore no hafara is required. However, and this is critical for our understanding of our Gemara, end of the first line on Tzadi Gimel Amud Aleph, Rabbi Kiva Omer, Yafer, absolutely, the husband should do hafara. There was a chalos to this woman's konam, to this woman's promise, because Shema ta'adif alav yoser min haroilo. Maybe that she'll have more income than was normal, and therefore the husband would not have rights to all of it, and therefore she would be able to make this konam. But that really shows us the principle of davar shelo bala olam. We don't yet know how much she's going to generate, how much she's going to make. We have no clue. But the Gemara indicates that according to Rabbi Akiva, based on this Mishnah, the Gemara indicates that he holds that there was chalos in her konam, and that therefore means that he holds that there's davar shelo bala olam, that there's a kinyan, that Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam. Says the Gemara, not a raya. Maybe Rabbi Akiva still fits with our Mishnah because ha'itmar Allah amar Reb Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua. The case was not where she said anything that I make, but omeres yikachu yodai le'osehem, anything that I do with my hands, anything that I make with my hands, and forget about the product that she makes. This is a question of how she makes those products. It says the Gemara, diodayim isnahu ba'alma. Her hands are in the world. You can't say that her hands are davar shelo bala olam. They're attached to her body. They're not davar shelo bala olam, and therefore, it seems that Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold of Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bala Olam. Rather, he holds Ein Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bala Olam. However, says the Gemara, now we're getting sidetracked into a conversation about whether or not we hold that Rabbi Akiva holds of Makna Davar Shelo Bala Olam. Upliga de Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Damar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Huna kirav, Virav kirab Yanai, Virav Yanai kirab Chia, Virav Chia kirabi. Rabbi Kireb Meir, Rabbi Meir Kireb Elazar ben Yaakov, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Kireb Akiva. All of these great people, Amoraim and Tanaim, they're all of the opinion to Amar Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bala Olam. So unlike line 3 of this Gemara where it says Ha'itmar Allah in the name of Rav Huna, that really Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold of Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bala Olam. He, along with many of his colleagues and predecessors, were of the opinion that really does something is makna shelo bala olam. And now the Gemara is going to go through the list of all of the Amoraim and Tanaim that we just quoted as to what sources they use to prove that Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam. Says the Gemara, Rav Huna Mahi. What's the sheet of Rav Huna? De itmar. There's a statement in the Amoraim. Hamocher perus dekel lechavero. A person agrees to sell fruits from a dekel, from a palm tree, to his friend. Amar Rav Huna. Before the fruits begin to grow on the tree, person can change his mind. But once they start growing, Rav Nachman Amar, he disagrees. What's their machlokes? That according to Rav Huna, he holds that Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam, and therefore, once it starts growing, you can no longer renege on your commitment. Rav Nachman disagrees and says that it ain't davar in Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bala Olam, and therefore you can always be choser. Amar Rav Nachman, however, does agree. Modina, he agrees. The Shamit v'achil lo mafkinan mine, that if in fact I actually give the recipient that I made this commitment to, if I give him the fruits, the halacha is we don't take them back. What about Rav? So Rav says, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, Omer lechavero sada zu shani lokech lekishe ekachena kinu yalach me'achshav. That if a person says for something that's going to happen in the future, I'm making a kinyan to you now, the halacha is that it's kone. What about Rav Yanai? Well, Rav Yanai was kirib chia. The Rav Yanai havale arisa. Rav Yanai had a sharecropper, a farmer, someone that worked for him. Every Erev Shabbos, this aris, this person would bring a basket of fruits to the home of Rav Yanai. Tosfos points out that this was in fact that it belonged to the sharecropper, the fruits. It didn't belong to Rav Yanai. And Hahu Yoma, one Friday afternoon, Nogale, the sharecropper was running late with the basket of fruits. V'lo asan, he didn't show up with the fruits. So before Shabbos started, Shakal, Rav Yanai took Eser mi Pere de Bese, alayhu. He took 10 fruits of his own, and with those 10 fruits, he gave the appropriate trumos and maasros, whatever he needed to separate. The reason he did this is because he didn't want the foods to be tevel, in which case he wouldn't be able to fix it on Shabbos. He wouldn't be able to do the tikkun. That's an isur derabanan, to be metaking tevel to make it edible. And therefore, he separated it before. This shows that davar shelo bala olam, because the fruits haven't shown up yet. And nevertheless, the meiser that he took away before Shabbos started, they were sufficient. And it worked to remove the status of tevel, even though the fruits were lo bala olam. And also, Lakame de Reb Chia, Reb Yanai brought this to Reb Chia, and Omar Le, Shapir Avada, you did a great job. That was a great move by you to take off the meiser before the fruits showed up. The Tanya, because the Brisa writes as follows. Laman tilma liras Hashem elokecha kol hayamin. The pasuk says that you should learn to fear Hashem all of your days. And what's the drash in this brisa? Elu Shabbosos v'yamin tovim. This is referring to Shabbos and Yom Tov. Lemay hilchasa. What aspects of Hilchos Shabbos are we talking about? Says the Gemara, Ilema, if you want to say la'asure umeichal, if you want to say that the pasuk is teaching us that we're allowed to be me'aser in order to eat the food on Shabbos, that can't be, because to be me'aser is only a din derabanan. Yitzrich kral and mishrei tilto derabanan. Can't have a pasuk in Chumash to be matir a din that isn't even aser according to the Torah. Muktzah is a din derabanan. And if muktzah is a din derabanan and being ma'aser in order to remove the status of tevel is only a din derabanan, there's no way that a pasuk in Chumash was coming to be matir that. So as we turn to the top of Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Elalav ki hai gavna. What must be going on in this pasuk is that we're talking about our case. What's our case? Rashi helps us fill in the gaps. Dibur hamaschil elalav ki hai gavna de muter le'aser al mashel lo bala olam ve'asi lavo letzorach Shabbos. So Rashi says that it's permissible to tithe prior to the arrival of the food, which may show up on Shabbos. The asid, and it's going to show up on Shabbos, and it's l'tzorech oneg Shabbos. So Rashi, if we were learning this with a lamdash we would have said Rashi's putting in some conditions. Maybe the only time it works is if it's for oneg Shabbos, because Rashi does add in those words, subject to another discussion. At the top of Daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Amar Le, Rav Yanai says back to Reb Chia, I actually didn't think I did the right move. I was called out in my dream, and they said, Kane ratzutz, you're a splintered piece of wood. My lav, doesn't this mean something bad? My lav hachika amrli, this is what they were telling me in my dream. That you're relying on this crutch, on this cane that's splintered wood. So the Rebbe says back, no, Reb Chia says back, lo, hachika amrelach, really, kana ratzutz lo yishbor, pashta kea lo yichbena, really is talking about a piece of wood that won't break, and it is a positive thing and not a negative thing. This raises shilas about, can you rely on a dream for piskei halacha? That's not something that we do in our generation, but clearly the Gemara seems to have had a real conversation about it. 5 lines down on Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Rebbe, what's his mari makom that he holds Adam makna davar shelo bala olam, that a person can make an acquisition now for something that has yet to happen in the future? To Tanya, the Brisa writes, Losaskir eved aladonav. What is this pasuk talking about? Rabbi Omer, Belokech eved almanas l'shachar ro'akosum medaber. We're talking about an eved that you purchase in order to free him. Hey Chidami, what's the case? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, the case is as follows. The Kasav Le, he writes in the star for the eved, once I purchase you, you're retroactively free to this moment. And therefore we see that Rebbe is of the opinion that Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam. Reb Meir, what's his mari makom that he holds and Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam? That's not. The Mishnah writes, Homer leisha harad mekudeshes li la'achar she'eskayer, la'achar she'tiskayri, la'achar she'ishtachrer, la'achar she'tishtachreri, la'achar she'yamos ba'alech, la'achar she'tamas achosech, la'achar she'yachlotz lach. This is the brisa that we saw at the beginning of today's daf. And Reb Meir quotes this Mishnah, which says that all of the conditions that are put into a kedushin that are futuristic conditions, eina mekudeshes. That's the Tanakama. Reb Meir, at the end of the very first long line, disagrees, and he says Reb Meir omer mekudeshes. So we see from him that we do allow for future episodes to create for a kinyan even before they take place. That's the same as Adam makna davar shelo bala olam. Second long line. How do we know that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam? Says the Gemara to Tanya. Yeser al kein amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov afilu im amar peros aruga zu tlushim yehu truma al peros aruga mechubar mo peros aruga mechubar al peros zu tlushin l'chshevo shlish. If a person says these fruits that are growing on the vine, these fruits that are already separated from the vine, one can have impact as it relates to Meiser on one another, because it says if it grows a third, v'yid l'shu, and then v'yiviu shlish v'nishu dvarav kayam, and we see that it works. So that shows you that it hasn't happened yet. We still say that the kinyan has already taken place, and that shows us yet again that Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam. What about Rabbi Akiva? Halfway down on the page, he's the last in the list of the greats who hold that Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam. Rabbi Akiva says that's not, and this is the brisa we saw earlier on the top of Daf Tzadi Gimel Amud Aleph. Konim shani osa leficha eino tzarich lahafer. Rabbi Akiva Omer yafer shema tadi v'lav yeser min ha'roi lo. Because we had said previously that Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that if a woman makes a vow that she's not going to allow her maaseh yadeha, her handiwork, to be benefited by her husband, Rabbi Akiva still says that's a konam, that still counts, even though we don't know the future. Maybe she'll produce more than the amount that she normally would have been forced to give to her husband, and therefore, even though it's unknown, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, Adam is makna davar shelo bala olam. Let's get back to our sugya about a Yevamos. The Gemara says halfway down, 6 lines into the wide lines, Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, Bo minei Rav Sheshes, they asked the Shavuot to Rav Sheshes. We know that Mishum Miguna Kilu Barabanan, we learned in our Mishnah on Pei Zayin, we learned that we rely on one witness for freeing up a Yevama. Understood. However, it says the Gemara, Eid Echad b'Yevama Mahu. What about an Eid Echad in the Yevama? We'll see soon that there's 2 ways to understand this question. Here's version number 1. Do we say as follows? Time of the Eid Echad, the reason why we trusted Eid Echad is Mishum de Milsa de Avid Gluye, because it's probably going to end up showing its ugly head in the future. If really the first husband's alive, he'll probably show up. So because of the fact that it's Milsa de Avid Gluye, because of the fact that it's very possible that it's very possible that the truth will come out. So therefore, lo mashaker, v'chanami lo mashaker, maybe by a Yevama the same is true. So maybe we should allow it. Or Dilmor, perhaps, time of the Eid Echad mishum de'ihi daiko minsaba. Maybe we should say that the reason why Eid Echad works is because she does some research. But maybe when it comes to her Yavam, which is a brother-in-law, she may have some type of affection for him. That maybe because of the fact that she may care for her brother-in-law, she's not going to check so clearly, and therefore the Eid Echad does not work. Could be. So Amar Lahu Rav Sheshes, well, this is the Chakira that we just posed. What's the answer? Rav Sheshes says, Tani Tuha, we already learned this. And Amrullah, where did we learn this? We learned this just the other day. In a case scenario of Meis Benech, let's say that a woman, her husband and son go out of town, and her son dies, and then her husband dies. And in that case, she is a Yevama, and then Vinis Yavma, then she marries, let's say, Shimon, as part of Yibum. Really, they find out that actually the husband died first and then the son died first, in which case there is no Yibum, so she's married to the wrong person. She should not be married to her brother-in-law because her brother died before the son did. His brother died before his son did. So then it says the Gemara, Rishon ve'achron mamzer. So you have to get divorced, and the first and last children are mamzer. Now, hechidami, what's the case that we're dealing with? Ilema, if the case that we're dealing with is with 2 opposing sets of witnesses, treu trey, so then my chazis to samchazani, who says we should listen to any one group over the other? Smochahani. There's no reason to listen to any one over any other one. They're equals. So why would that make any sense? Vote. And furthermore, mamzer safek, it should be mamzer. It should not say just mamzer. It should say safek mamzer. It's not a vadai that it's a mamzer. It says the Gemara, if you want to say that as it relates to mamzerus, the Gemara wasn't clear, it wasn't intending, the Mishnah wasn't intending to be so exacting, lo dak, that can't be. Because after all, we learned yesterday, we learned another case in the Mishnah where the language was very specifically chosen, and it was a din d'oraisa. So you can't say that the Mishnah was lo dak, that the Mishnah was being unspecific. Ella, what must be the case that we're dealing with? Says the Gemara, that we're talking about one aid, the time of the asube trey and akchashuha, that if it's 1 against 2, then we can understand that they would be rejected. However, had we been dealing with a case of Yevama and we only had 1 aid, we would have trusted that aid, Behemoth. Good. So this is version 1 of the Gemara. Let's learn V'ika da Amar. There are those who have another version of our Gemara. This will take us until about 10 lines down on Tzadi Dal and Amar Aleph, and then we'll stop. V'ika da Amar haloti boilach de'afilu ihi nami mehemna. Says the Gemara, there's really no shaila. she herself is going to be believed. Forget about Eid Echad. That's pashut that an Eid is going to be believed. It's not. How do we know that a woman is considered reliable to paskin for herself, that she has Eidus about the status of her first husband? Says the Gemara, that's not 4 lines from the bottom on Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis. A woman who says that she knows that her husband has died, the halacha is tinaseh, she can get married. Meis Bali, if her husband died and they have no kids, and her husband Reuven has a brother, great, tisyabein. So there's no shaila that we trust Eid Echad in that regard. So what then was the question they asked of Rav Sheshes? Kiti boilach lemishra Yevama le'alma. We're asking a different question. We're not asking about allowing a Yevama to marry her Yavam. We're saying, can we free up a Yevama to be marrying someone lashuk, to be marrying someone outside the family? So says the Gemara, let's talk about the two sides. Within this question about allowing a woman to be marrying someone lashuk, to be marrying someone outside of the Yibum family, my time of Eid Echad, what's the logic to assume that an Eid Echad would actually be allowed? Maybe because Mishum de Milsa David lo Meshaker, Hachanami lo Meshaker, because it's still very likely that the original husband, had he been alive, that he would show up at some point. That's Milsa David lo. That's something that's likely to reveal itself. Therefore, she won't lie. O Dilma, or perhaps is the reason why we say that Eid Echad works is Taima, Eid Echad Mishum De'ihi Daiko Mitzvah. Maybe the reason why we rely on her is because she's willing to do the research and do the work and do the investigation to make sure that the person is dead. But Veha, let's say in this case, and this is the opposite of the first approach, maybe we'd say Lo Daiko Mitzvah, she wouldn't try so hard. It's the Misnahu Tisanyale. Maybe she dislikes the Yavam, and therefore she's not going to do such a good investigation, and therefore she might go free under false pretenses. So therefore, says the Gemara in the top of Tzadi Dalad Manalav, Amar Luhu Rav Sheshes, to that, Rav Sheshes responded, Tani Tuha. Really, it's a different question altogether. It's about freeing her up to be marrying someone in the shuk. And what's the brisa that Rav Sheshes brings to prove his point? So Amrullah, the same brisa we saw in the bottom of the other page in version number 1. What's the brisa that was brought there and now is brought here again? Amrullah, if they said to her, if they say her husband died first and then the son, so then when he says she married somebody else, there's no yibum in that case because there's still a son, and then she gets married. The Edim show up and Amrullah chiluf hayodvar, really was the other way, and you should have married your brother-in-law. You should have married Shimon, not somebody else. It says the Gemara, the halacha is teitze ve'avlad rishon ve'achron mamzer. And the Gemara asks a similar line of questioning as we did in version number 1. Though here it's in version number 2, 4 lines down, Tzadi Dalad Manala. Hey Chidami, what's the case? Ilema trey. If you want to say it's 2 sets of Eidim, 2 Eidim against 2 Eidim, so then that can't be our case, because my chaz is to samchesahani, smochahani. Who says that you should listen to version number 1? Maybe you should listen to version number 2. We don't know which Eidim to listen to. So therefore, that's problem number 1. The Odin, furthermore, mamzer, it should have said mamzer in the brisa. It should have said safek mamzer, because it's not a vadai mamzer in this case. It says the Gemara, v'chitema lo dak. If you want to say that really the language is lo dak, that it's really not being specific in its language, and it really does mean safek mamzer, that can't be. Hamidikatani seifa rishon mamzer v'achron eno mamzer. We learned in the seifa that the language of Mamzer L'Rishon and Mamzer L'Achron was very specific language. Therefore, Shmamina D'Daf Kutani Elalav. It must be that the brisa quoted at the top of this page on Tzadi Daled is Chad. It's talking about only 1/8. The time of the Asube Trey Akchashuha. The only reason why we wouldn't believe them is if this 1/8 was rejected by 2 Eidim. However, Halav Hachi Behemet. Really, maybe we should be able to say that we do believe this person as long as there's no hakchasha, and therefore, according to version number 2, a Yevama would be allowed to marry someone lashuk even with Eid Echad. Says the Gemara, we cannot embrace Rav Sheshes' answer. We have to tear it apart. Le'olam trei. Really, we are talking about one set of Eidim against another, 2 people versus 2 people. Rav Acha bar Minyumi elsewhere speaks about an idea where we're talking about Eidei Hazama, and maybe we're talking about Eidei Hazama over here. Eidei Hazama, for those of you who are not yet familiar, Eidei Hazama is witnesses who give testimony, and then they're rejected by a subsequent set of witnesses who say the first witnesses could not possibly have seen what they said because Imanu Hayisim, they were with me in a different location. So maybe that's what's going on here, that the Eidim that we have in our case are Eidei Hazama. So that's how the Gemara concludes by rejecting the leniency that Rav Sheshes was trying to employ to say that we do trust one aid in order to allow for the marriage of a Yevama to someone outside the family. And says the Gemara, we don't accept that because maybe our case is really talking about 2 Eidim against 2 Eidim. We'll stop right here, 10, 12 lines down, and Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow night in person with the words of Amar Le Rav Mordechai on Sadi Dalet Amud Aleph, wishing you all a beautiful night.